Short answer is that I work on and maintain electric generators. So, I mean, like I'm the guy that you call when the power goes out and then the other power goes out. So in so many words. Again, I'm not a licensed electrician, not really required to, at least not in my state. But, you know, yeah, I mean, I work with this stuff pretty much all the time. To answer your second question about nuclear power, I have a tortured relationship with nuclear power. That's a kind way of putting that. It's not because I don't understand the physics of it. Of course I do. Nuclear power is a brilliant idea. And as with lots of brilliant ideas, it takes a fairly brilliant set of people to maintain brilliant ideas for the long haul. Now, nuclear power, unfortunately, is one of these things, that's good and bad, of course, that outlasts people by a lot. You know, nuclear power has the potential to outlast, you know, the people who create the power station, and then those people are long gone, you know, hundreds of years. And that technically, if it's built properly with the right kinds of materials and the right metallurgy and so on, it could potentially last much longer. The question is, does the civilization that built it maintain that discipline into the future? This is a problem that I have because, like, I thought about this for a long time. There was a, I don't remember who it was. Somebody put out, they commissioned science fiction writers, computer nerds, I mean, you name it, just physicists, you know, I mean, and they said, okay, hey, if you want to send a message in the future, 10,000 years into the future, trying to warn people not to go into this hazardous waste area, how would you do it? And pretty much everybody gave up because anything you would do would potentially create even more curiosity. You know what I mean? So I think of it like this. What if we don't have, like, okay, so for example, let me go into the, I don't want to say supernatural. Please don't put me into that category, but you've seen well witching, right? Or what do they call that? I always called it well witching, but it's where you hold the little rods and you go around, dowsing. Okay, there is no scientific way to measure that that I'm aware of. People have tried. It happens, but we have no way of scientifically measuring it, which is the definition of hard science. Now, what if there is a type of background radiation that exists on this planet that we don't fully understand, and we haven't really figured out a way to measure it, so therefore we don't know it's there, so we have ignorance. What if that background radiation that exists from a civilization a long time ago is still here, and that's why we only live 80 to 100 years, as opposed to maybe living 500 to 2,000 years, right? This is not me just coming up with a cool science fiction plot, okay, or a Twilight Zone episode, although I do have all that written. But it's not that. It's legitimately asking the question of, what if you create a way to create electricity that it works wonderfully, but do we have the discipline in the future to maintain that? That's one way. That's one of my thoughts on it. Let's assume that we can do all of that. We have the ability to pull all of that off, and we have the ability to keep civilization around and in that same frame of mind. Well, then maybe it works out. There's still entropy to deal with, which is the actual housings and everything else. You still have to maintain all of that, which leads me into the next little tortured problem I have with nuclear power. If by complete deregulation, and I am a deregulation kind of guy, I really am. I mean, you have but to go back and look at my body of work to know that I'm very much about deregulation. But if you totally deregulate everything, here's what happens. The market, right? What is the market? The market's just people. And people, when they smell the idea of something for nothing or getting something more back than what they put out, like moths to a flame, they go right to it. And so a bunch of people will try to rush into the nuclear power sector. If that happens, we are going to have what I would call a capitalist disaster. And I use the term capitalist advisedly, meaning that the disaster we would have would be great. The strong survive, the survival of the fittest, right? The cheapest and best run and so forth. That's great. We want all of that, right? In nuclear power, however, if we have, say, 400 reactors, but we only need 200, so now 200 of them are going to fail, who cleans that up? Yeah, see, that's the problem. There are places all over this world where, you know, and there's like YouTube videos on this, in fact, where companies became really popular, they started making money, and then they lost everything, and then the company went away, and then there's no more profit, everybody's gone, and now there is a cleanup that nobody is going to do. And nobody wants to pay for it because, and especially if you have a hard currency environment, this is the conundrum. I'm a hard currency advocate. And so I'm pointing out to you, that's another conundrum, is that if you have a hard currency environment, there's no way to print your way out of it. You can't print a bunch of money and say, oh, well, here's a bunch of fake money, go clean this up. You can't do that anymore. So this is a legitimate problem that has yet to be solved. And trust me, I've thought about this stuff for longer than I probably should. These are problems that have yet to be solved. And, you know, so you could say, like, well, maybe we could regulate. Okay, if we're going to regulate, then who picks the regulators and who picks the winners and losers? Yeah, see, that's the other problem. Now we have to come back to the idea of a culture. And if you're going to come back to a culture, cultures create borders, borders create countries. You are right back in the rat race. This is the same conversation I have with the Texas people. It's the same conversation I have with them. This isn't about whether or not I agree or disagree. I fundamentally agree with all kinds of stuff. I mean, like, dude, there's a whole bunch of people out there that hate, I'm not kidding. There are people that hate me, like, viscerally, I've to the point where I've had to block them. Yet I agree with them on a bunch of stuff, but because they can't understand, like, dude, no, you have to think a little bit further in the future than just your lifespan. You have to start thinking 500, 600, 700,000 years. And when you're talking about nuclear power, you have to think 40,000 years into the future. That is a lot of unknown unknowns. Okay, that's a lot of unknown unknowns. So that's the other problem. Yet another problem I have with it, what if there is a catastrophic disaster, or more likely, sabotage, where someone deliberately is upset about something and decides to sabotage a reactor and creates a whole bunch of radiation that crawls its way over like 100,000 people or 200,000 people. Or maybe in the Northeast, it crawls its way over several million people. How do insurance companies pay that? Insurance companies already won't pay claims. And if, once again, if you have a hard currency environment, the government can't print their way out of it. And even if they could print their way out of it to like pay all these people, all you have is inflation. So you see what I'm saying? Like, this is a zero-sum game, and you have to be very careful with, you know, or as a civilization, we have to be very careful about this. I use the astronaut analogy in the previous video that I'm responding to on this. Like, if you think about it in terms of being an astronaut, you have to think about, like, okay, if you're dealing with something finite and unstable, that takes great care to deal with that. So since the insurance companies are not going to pay out those claims, and they never will, and since governments won't be able to solve that problem, how do you explain to people that they may have just lost 40 years off their life? Or more. I mean, the Chernobyl comes to mind, right? This is the problem with it. Yes, I do realize that the atmosphere and the earth and the water do eventually, you know, break down radiation. I get all of that. I get the science behind that. I'm just pointing out that, like, that doesn't solve the problem of the people that you irradiated. Okay? I mean, like, you can say it's greater good, but most of the evil in this world has been done for the greater good. That's my thoughts on nuclear power.